Hi, everyone. As you're logging on, today would be a great day to actually be on the computer looking at the slides if you can. We will, as we've promised, have a demonstration of an allocation tool, and it's a great visual. So we have ERS on our call today that's going to do some of that demonstration after we do a little bit of a warm-up activity. Anyway, it'll make a lot more sense if you can see what's going on. So if you're only on the phone, this would be a great time to, if you can, connect to a screen and get that loaded up.
Yeah, and this is Katie. If you need to email me and ask me to send you a deck, if you can't see them, I'm happy to do that. So just shoot me an email.
And maybe we should go ahead and get started. Katie, what do you think?
Yeah, that sounds great. So today we're going to do a demo of the ERS allocation tool, like Marguerite just mentioned. But first, I just want to go over a quick change in the communication norms. So I did something yesterday that I should have done a long time ago, which is practice what it looks like from your end. And I realized that you all can't see what we thought you could see. So this is a new screenshot. So the same thing when it comes to raising your hand to be unmuted, please do that. It's the same process as before. But the question box, I now know that when you ask a question or you make a comment that you cannot see everyone else's questions or comments unless we reply all. So then it sends it back out to the whole group, the question and the answer. So we're going to keep things the same way that they have been going in terms of you can ask questions or make comments in that box. We will see them. We will verbalize those questions and answer them verbally. But then we also have Tim on our team who's going to be typing in some answers and sending them all back out. So hopefully that will help you all see more of what your peers are asking or commenting on than you have seen in the past. So we apologize for not realizing that sooner, but we will try to correct for that as best as we can moving forward. And so you might just see a little bit more action in your question box than you have seen on prior calls.
Great. And the agenda.
Okay, so we're going to have a quick, like Marguerite mentioned, a little bit of a warm up. We've talked to about 4 states over the past 2 weeks and have learned a lot about how states are getting towards the final stages of developing their plans for meeting the requirement. So we do have a couple of things that we've learned over the past 2 weeks that we'll just quickly go over about what to do with expenditures that are not coded to schools. We're then going to do the demo of the ERS tool, and then we do have 3 upcoming meetings that I just want to make you aware of. So the first one is May 24th to 25th. We will be, Marguerite and myself will be at CCSSO at the IMAC meeting in Phoenix. So if you will be there, we will see you there. If you will not be there, but know that someone on your team is going to IMAC, someone at your SCA, and would like them to connect with us, let us know, and we're happy to talk with them or let them know about our sessions. And then on the 31st, as you all know, we did, at one point this group was associated with the BSCP Center, and the Economics Lab still does some work for the BSCP Center. And so we'll be hosting a webinar as a result of that work that we still do with them, where we'll be going over the financial transparency requirement, the data inventory process, and a couple of things that you all have already seen. But it would be a great time if you have anyone on your team who you'd like to kind of start from the beginning and see what this whole thing is about. That would be a good thing for them to attend, and I'll make sure that you all have the information about that. And then we will have our next regular FitWay webinar on June 8th, same time.
Great. All right, so first, as you know, we always start with a meme. Katie found this one. It is a prescription for more cowbell. And if you are not familiar with that Saturday Night Live skit, you are missing out. I can't even see the word cowbell without laughing now. So hopefully that'll just set the stage for our webinar today. But we're going to kick it off with this question. And this is a question that kind of leads into the tool that we have today, which is who decides what gets coded at Central and what gets coded at the school level inside LEAs. And this is a little bit of a flashback, but way back when in an earlier webinar, we had divided up into sort of 3 options. A was that the SEA would specify which objects or functions or both that had to be coded at the school level and which had to be coded central. And that exists in some places. Or B, again, the SEA decides, but the SEA might specify conditions for when something is coded at the school level, like who controls the money or something like that. And or how much time does the FTE work in a building or something. And on the other side was really kind of more that the LEAs would decide themselves whether something should be coded at the school or the central level. And as we were weighing those decisions, that seemed like a relevant trade-off to kind of bring back up to the forefront in preference of in advance of showing you this tool. So you may remember this slide where we said there was a basic approach to site level accounting, and these are the three options again. The SEA would specify options or functions to be coded to schools, or the SEA would specify a set of conditions for when costs are to be reported at the school level, or the SEA was essentially neutral, and that the LEA would make the choice about what is coded directly to schools, but also would separately make sure to report all central costs by school. So they would be captured somewhere. It wasn't that you could hide money. And if we went back to these three options, Rhode Island was a great example of the first model. And you may remember that Cindy shared with us a lot about the Rhode Island Chart of Accounts, which specifies for different objects and functions where that should be coded, and if it's coded to a school, how it gets coded, if it's divided up and things like that. And the upsides or considerations and concerns were that it gives more uniformity in how school versus central costs are parsed. It does require an apportioning methodology, like the example in Rhode Island. It could be onerous for some LEAs. This is kind of on the downside, to separate central from school level. So you can imagine a charter school where they say everything's in our building, there's no such thing as central, and you're asking us to artificially separate things, and people's jobs are doing both of those. Or maybe in weighted student formula districts, this could be tough because the district may allocate money to schools, and some of that money then may be used for different functions or objects that are specified as either central or school level. And in non-traditional districts as well, online one school districts, things like that, it's a little, the distinction between central and school level might be just less apparent. And the last concern, and this was one that came up in our in-person meeting, is that a very fixed accounting system could work to constrain the thinking in the LEA about how to apply funds. So they might say, well, that must be coded here, so that therefore I must use it in this way. So if I have to code it at the school, I need to now take this program and put it at the school, which may or may not be the case, but we have seen in the past that accounting systems can work like almost a set of work rules that could constrain LEA spending. So you get some ups and downs with that first model. If you look at the second model where the SEA says, here's a set of conditions, for instance, maybe when staff are solely assigned to a school or when school has control over the dollars. And here, the upside is there's some meaning to the distinction between school and central. It means something. That if the money's in one place or the other, that there's something about the money or how it's used or something like that. That it's tough though. I would say that most accounting structures don't have these conditions built in. And whereas, this may be asking for a completely new variable in the accounting structure. So the mechanics of it can be difficult. The third model, which is that, the SEA doesn't specify when something is school or central, but the LEA gets to. And then if the LEA does do that, then the LEA just has to account for all its central money and list it separately so we can add for a grand total at the school level. And we saw some examples in our previous webinars that we had a Colorado example, and the Ohio chart of accounts effectively, for the most part, works this way. And in this case, the districts are the ones to face the potentially healthy questions about how money is assigned. So let's say there's a bunch of money at the central office, you know, and the schools say, how come you guys have so much of our money? I just heard a CFO on the radio do this the other day, say, well, hey, you know, we run a lot of programs out of our central office that are high regarded programs, our professional development program, maybe our parent program, and obviously transportation and a few other things, and those cost money and they're of high value, and those are central costs. At the same time, you know, the central office may feel pressure to start being clear about that money and handing more of it over to schools, but that would be a local conversation that may not be a bad conversation. It sort of puts the district in charge of being the fiduciary authority on that distinction. On the flip side, you know, there will clearly be less uniformity in the coding approaches. Some will put a whole lot of money at the schools and others may not. So when we go to compare spending on schools across districts, we'll have to add in that central share in order to make sure we have a number that can be compared. So those are the three models, but, and here's the big but, many SEAs will likely use a hybrid. Here's a hybrid example, and probably a very common one, that the SEA will probably specify that some objects must be coded to schools, for instance, the salaries of the real teachers that are assigned to schools, which is consistent with the ESSA law. So at a minimum, you're going to have to code them to schools. They also may require that some categories be separated. We've talked about that in this group. Like, do we want to purposely separate transportation? Do we want to purposely pull out and put at the central office, maybe even something like special ed? And those are two things where the SEA might make some specifications, but they still may let the LEA choose when to apportion or assign all the rest of their costs to schools, where some might assign professional development to the schools, while some keep those central, and those conversations are just going to be conversations that will happen at each school. And then to make sure we can compare numbers, all central costs will be reported in per pupil terms alongside the school level spending for a grand total. So that we see actually as a likely hybrid example, and yet we'll probably see states do almost everything in between. So before we ask our presenters to take over and demonstrate the ERS tool, we thought we'd put this out to you all. Do you have a sense of the method your state will use? And you can use the question box to respond. Sort of A was that the state will specify objects or functions. B, that the state will specify conditions. C, the LEAs will get to choose when to apportion and assign the cost to the school. Or D, a hybrid approach. And I'll give you a moment to kind of type in that question box if you know what you're doing, and if you don't, you could say we're not sure yet. And you are also always welcome to raise your hand. We'll unmute you and you can ask a question or comment or say, none of this makes sense. I don't know what you're talking about.
And I'll just go through some of the responses we're hearing. Wyoming says they're doing a hybrid. Looks like Connecticut is doing a hybrid. B from Alina, I'm blanking on the state, Vermont maybe. Maryland is not sure which methodology will be used at this time. Virginia says A, but possibly a hybrid as well. DC is not entirely sure, but likely a hybrid approach. Alina, yeah, Vermont. So Vermont said that they are doing, sorry, just kidding. Next up. Utah is doing a hybrid. Indiana is leaning towards a hybrid approach as well. So it sounds like mostly hybrids with a couple of A's mixed in.
A's and yeah, that makes sense. Well, and Katie, just in case it sounds like I don't know what's really happening, I can't see the questions come through either. So I don't know if that's a change or not, but we'll figure that out later. So it sounds like, you know, there's still a little bit of a variation, and that this sort of kind of hybrid notion is probably practical for some of you. So that's a good context. If anyone has a question or a comment before I jump forward, this would be a good time to do it. So I don't know if there are any questions or comments that you want to make?
I don't see that anyone has any now, but if you do have any and you want to raise your hand and ask them, please do.
Okay, so if you are using, you know, a hybrid or allowing for any LEA choice, then the ERS tool, I don't know if my screen just did a weird thing. I'm not sure if you all could hear me, but I'll start over on that. If you are interested in having any component of an LEA choice in your model, the ERS tool could be really useful, because they have a tool they're going to demonstrate that will help LEAs make choices about apportioning their costs. And at this point, I think I'm going to turn that over to ERS, and I think we may have to, you'll see a little changing of the screen going on as we get the ERS team up and running and presenting. And Katie, maybe you can introduce our guests.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have Jonathan Travers from ERS, and we have Renee Sullivan from ERS. So Jonathan's going to give a little bit of an intro to the tool, and then Renee is going to actually be doing the demonstration today.
Thanks, Katie and Marguerite. This is Jonathan. Marguerite, I thought your framing was really nice of the sort of existential purpose of the tool and the design choices that SEAs are exploring. The notion of what is reported at the school level versus what is not reported at the school level, and then how to most accurately and reliably allocate or push those centrally reported dollars down to a per pupil school level metric is actually a question that ERS has focused on over the years, and we think is obviously really important for this for this requirement and for being able to report this data accurately. We see significant variation across districts that we work with in both the percentage of total dollars that are reported at the school level, and then also the nature of the things that are reported at school versus reported centrally. So we thought that it would be helpful to put a tool out there, primarily for LEAs. I'll talk a little bit more about this, but primarily for LEAs, that helps you just get your arms around current reporting and the distinction between school and central. And then also explore options for evolving that moving forward. For really specifically exploring options for allocating centrally accounted for dollars to schools in a way that isn't just your straight per pupil, because that's sort of the default thing is straight per pupil, but it may be that that's inaccurate in a variety of circumstances. We talked about special ed earlier as potentially something to isolate, also potentially something to allocate on not a straight per pupil basis, but more a special ed per pupil basis. Things like we see often security guards or activities or services that are provided only to a subset of schools, only to secondary schools. Allocating those out on a per pupil basis might be misleading also. So we might want to think about a different allocation rule for those. And ultimately, after exploring all that, these attribution decisions, we want you to be able to see, okay, well, what does that actually do to my per pupil reporting? How different is it when I allocate on a more nuanced basis than when I just do a straight per pupil for all the essentially reported, essentially accounted for dollars? So that's sort of the big existential purpose of the tool. Renee Sullivan from ERS is the sort of the developer of this. And she, and I think the way that we wanted to do this is that she and Katie were going to go back and forth to get a little bit deeper into how the tool is set up. a little bit on how to use it, but more on sort of what the questions are that it's answering and how. I would say that as you're engaging in this, I think the details on what columns represent what are much less important than overall what is it trying to accomplish. And we'll talk about at the end a little bit on next steps on how to get access to it. By the way, it's free. How to get access to it and potential support options moving forward. So Renee and Katie.
Awesome. Thank you, Jonathan. Hi, everyone. Yep, this is Renee Sullivan with ERS. As Jonathan was mentioning, Katie and I have essentially scripted a demo of Q&A through this. Katie's going to represent the LEA. I'll represent myself at ERS and talk about tool design. But as we go through this, if you have any questions, please type into the question box. We will be able to certainly answer them at the end, if not partially along the way. So with that, Katie, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, great. Thank you. So I am from an LEA and I just downloaded this great tool from ERS. I'm very excited, but I want to know, what's my first step? What do I need to do to set up a tool with my district specific data so that I can get into the analysis portion?
Great. So it's helpful to know that this is an Excel tool. So there are a few tabs you'll be engaging with. The first is in your financial data tab, and there are 3 steps in here. You'll first place your general ledger export into that tab, and then copy and paste your most descriptive data into 5 columns that are going to be part of your analysis output. These can be really any level of detail that you find most useful from your general ledger, and we know that varies by district. Finally, the third thing you'll do in this tab is a few coding fields. The first is just determining what you want to include or exclude. And then the second is thinking about where the dollars in that particular row are playing out at the school or at central. And then finally, where are the dollars billed to? Are they billed to schools or central? That is your financial data tab. And to marry that with your school's data, there is another tab. The first thing in this tab is a pivot table off of your financial expenditures. So you'll see there's already information that's automatically generated, which is your location, your school name, and your dollar amount. And then finally in here is where you'll enter your school attributes. This includes enrollment, student groups, any other key characteristics that you would like to be part of the analysis. And the key here is that the more you're able to enter or input, the more options you'll have for attribution.
Great, thank you. So I've got it set up and I've coded all of those financial fields that you mentioned. So I did put in the exclude, include, at the school, at central. So once I've done all that, how can I see how my expenditures are playing out? Like what's at central, what's being accounted for at the schools, and are there any central managed school services?
That is the first pivot in the analysis tab, Katie. So you'll see that the included dollars are broken out by what you've decided to be central costs, centrally managed school services, and those accounted for at schools. And you'll be able to also see those dollars that you've excluded in that first pivot table.
Great, thanks. Can I see what makes up each of these buckets of dollars? So what makes up the central costs or the centrally managed school services?
Yes, there is a deep dive for each of these 3 categories: the central costs, those at schools, and centrally managed school services. For the sake of this demo, I'm just going to be focusing on the centrally managed school services to dig into. So here you get a look into all of the dollars that you've coded, that you've selected, that are billed at central but play out at schools. You'll see that they're always sorted from highest percentage of centrally managed dollars down to lowest. And I want to acknowledge that it's easy to get a bit overwhelmed here. So the key is to really hone in on the things that make up the bulk of the cost. Here in the very first row, you can see that separate classes for special education make up a quarter of these dollars and then soon trail off. Another use of this deep dive is to see opportunities to recode financial data for clarity. And again, here we see that the largest centrally managed school expense is separate classes for special education, but it could be that this is even larger given that there's a separate line item later on for that same function. And if we were to combine them, we would be able to see exactly how much those separate classes are making up our centrally managed dollars.
Thanks. And I'll pause really quickly to see if we have any people that want to raise their hand and ask a question. Okay. So how can I see a specific object or function? How can I drill a little bit deeper in here?
Yes, so for any of these things, you can sort and filter or click for more detail. It is a standard pivot table, so that's helpful if you're looking for a very specific object or function that you want to see exactly where it is.
Okay, great. So this is really helpful for me to get an idea of where my dollars are going, but how can I make the attribution decisions that are going to affect my per pupil dollar amount across all the schools in my district?
Well, Katie, this is where it gets exciting. There are attribution decisions for dollars that are fully central and ones that are centrally managed school services. Similar to before, we are going to be focusing on the dollars that are the centrally managed school services. And you'd be able to expand and collapse to the level of detail that you think is most helpful to look at this information. So the very first thing that you'll be able to do is select whether or not you want to account for these dollars at schools, whether or not you want to attribute them, or whether you want to exclude them altogether. And you'll see there's a few options for that. Following that, anything that you've decided to attribute, there are several options for how you could attribute it. And we have included 16 different options, which is inclusive of 3 customizable ones that really will help you get at the nuance of how the dollars are playing out differently across schools. And you can see here, these are chosen by special ed student and per pupil. For anything that you've decided to account for at schools or exclude, you'll see that your attribution option is grayed out because those dollars are pulled out separately. What's helpful is that all of these decisions are aggregated in a summary table for you to see, which will break apart anything you've decided to attribute. You'll be able to see those dollars and how you've chosen to attribute them. And if you've pulled out any dollars to be accounted for at schools or exclude, those are summarized as well. I should mention at this moment in time that, again, there is a separate set of decisions you're able to make for those costs that are fully central as well. So you'll have a separate decision point for those.
And I'll just jump in. I can imagine that, you know, that once the districts sort of take a look at their data, they might see sometimes as much as 40 or 50 or 60% of their total expenditures not coded to schools, at which point they might say, well, what is that money? And do we want to report it differently than our default is? And that's the moment they're going to jump in here and start using this. And especially if there, you know, if there are people in the district saying, you know, particularly for larger districts saying, you know, what are you doing with all that money? And they're saying, well, we're doing things that are benefiting a lot of your schools. Then why not account for those things at the school? And I think that's where all this comes into play, if I'm correct, Renee.
Yep, that's right.
Okay. So Renee, do you want to show us how we can see how these decisions play out across all schools in the district?
Yeah, absolutely. So you, I think, have been paying attention to see that there's some dollars that are accounted for at schools, which we will pull out by school location. There are dollars that are attributed by central, which we didn't look at, but as I mentioned, there are decisions for those. And then there's dollars that are centrally managed school services. Each of those are broken out here based on the attribution rules you've selected. So you can see, compared to the district average, where the different schools in your district are lying based on those attribution decisions. Something that is very clear here that you might want to look into is Popeye High School has quite a bit of dollars accounted for at the school accounted for at the school, and Toyland Middle has the opposite problem. So you'll see the outliers highlighted in bright green and bright red for you to dig into. And the last thought here is that all of these things are summarized at the end. So you'll be able to look at all of the breakdown of your dollars, where they're accounted for centrally at school and centrally managed school services. Similar to what we looked at before, you'll see the breakdown of those centrally managed school service dollars, and any of the dollars that you've chosen to account at schools or exclude, you'll be able to dig into deeper to do exactly what, Marguerite, you were getting at in terms of asking the question of whether or not you want to take those dollars and actually go to the back end of your system and place them at the specific school that you think they should be at. So
am I right that someone can just reach out to us, and then we'll refer them to you, and then download the file and just start importing their own data?
That is correct.
And then play around with the tool. That's great. So what if a district had none of its money accounted for by school? Would this tool work to start applying cost to schools?
Marguerite, that's a good question. You know, I have to say, we designed it for districts that are already reporting some. Certainly, it might be helpful just to see functionally and let folks actually code. Okay, of all of the things that we're accounting for, here's a universe of stuff that plays out predictably and consistently at the school level. And of these, which are the things that make the most sense to actually start shifting our accounting practice on?
Yeah, you would have to have at least, I'm just thinking this through out loud, your real teacher salaries allocated. Otherwise, if you use the tool to do it, it would be an artificial average, right? Which is
exactly, yeah, good, thank you. Like, this would help you pinpoint, so what are the big chunks? And now, of those big chunks, what do I want to actually account for at school level? And I would put teachers strongly in that category. And what is it that we can get by with just allocating or attributing through some sort of allocation formula?
Yeah, so you can't use the tool to do everything, because you still got to go back and find your teachers and their real salaries and apply them in a real way to each school. But after that, you know, it's your choice, I guess, on what you want to do.
Yeah, it more just sort of shows you what the big chunks are, and then you can decide based on that.
Great. And I don't want to dominate. Are there other questions? Can any of you all think about how there might be districts in your state that would find something kind of handy? And it looked like a lot of you were possibly doing the hybrid model, which means that at least some of the money would be up to the district's choice on how they wanted to apportion it. And they could leave it all central if they hadn't coded it to school in any particular way, or they could go back through it with this tool and say, you know what, some of this I do want to report by school, so I'm going to go ahead and divide it out, at least mathematically somehow. Mm-hmm. And that can help them at least sort of start to communicate for their communities, like what's going on with this money.
Marguerite, we also have sort of have a theory or a hypothesis that there are a set of states that don't specify school location as part of the state accounting structure, but that have districts that report at the school level currently, and that it might be helpful.
We can verify that theory.
Sorry, say it again.
We can verify that is a fact.
Okay. but that it might be helpful for states to be able to understand the diversity of school level accounting practices that exist within districts in their state. And so having a few folks go through this process or something like it could be helpful. And even for the districts to sort of sit side by side and see the different choices that they're making for the different chunks of activity that are represented here.
Yeah, and I think that makes really great sense, especially if many of our SEAs are already working with some kind of subset of LEAs, and pulling them together in a working group is one great way of saying like, hey, let's all do this tool on our districts to kind of take stock as the state may be either contemplating making some rules about this, or further developing a chart of accounts that includes the location code and some rationale for when to use the location code. So it could be a tool that gets you that far along. And I'd love to add that, if you play around in the tool for a little while, you'll see that the ERS team did a lot of thinking about how to kind of, what steps to take to sort through your data and look at it in a way that yields some answers to some very predictable questions. And that same set of steps might be steps that the SEA could take on its larger file across all the districts. And I wonder, if and maybe we'll be able to do this, but to pull out that same set of steps that are inherent in this tool and make them available to SEAs.
And I am already getting some emails, both from SEAs and LEAs that are interested in this tool. So reach out if you'd like, or you can also make a comment in the question box and we'll know to put you guys in touch with ERS so you can get the tool.
Yeah. Great. One other note on the support here is that this, we think that this is pretty self-explanatory. We don't think it's entirely self-explanatory. So we're happy to send it out and then have a call with Renee or Jordan on the team to just sort of situate you to what's here and sort of support support getting the data set up.
See all this financial inquiry, it's just a great time to be in education finance, right, everyone? I like it. Any other questions or comments? And maybe you want to go back a couple of slides, Renee, because I know they went by pretty quickly for people, but one of the ones, if you go forward one more time again. See, this one I thought is really interesting. They have kind of the breakdown of the ways you might choose to apportion your costs. So first of all, what ERS has done is they said, where's the big money central, right? Like, what is it spent on? And that's a good question to ask if you're looking at one LEA, or if you're an SEA and you're looking at your entire data file, which you may already have. I know many of our participants on this call, in Mississippi and in Rhode Island and Ohio and stuff already have these mega files. And so what's the big money coded centrally? Take stock of it and then say, is there some of this that makes sense to be coding at schools? Should we use a formula to do it? What does the formula look like? And what are some of the options of the formulas? And here we see a bunch of these options of formulas. You could do it per pupil. That's a pretty obvious one. But you could do it per pupil type, or per staff member, or specifically per teacher, or per school. Like I've seen districts that say, well, we have a security officer team, and the security officer is pretty much, there's one per high school and a half-time one per middle school. Well, then just assign those costs out, and a one per high school and a one per dollar amount and a different dollar amount per middle school. So there are a lot of ways to kind of structure your thinking through here with this tool.
Yeah, on that point, Marguerite, I thought the nice thing that Renee and Jordan did in designing this was that whatever attributes you want to tie to your schools, You then can, in the data entry in one of those first spreadsheets, you then can allocate out resources on that basis here, or it shows up here.
Yeah, and they might do this before you start reporting them out, or take your real expenditure file, run it through here, and create some reports out of it. I think this week you should share what district this is. It sounds super fun. They have Popeye High School and Dinosaur and Biscuit High and Casper, Little Rascals. I mean, this is a fun district.
I think what you're seeing is someone who has small children trying to disguise the actual names of schools.
Dalmatians Middle School. I mean, who doesn't want to go there? Come on. Okay, we got a question. Jamie's asking, how are construction and capital costs handled in the tool?
Good question. The very first thing I will bring us back to is the include and exclude options in the input data. So certainly capital, I know I've discussed a lot of times, is excluded. And so that would be something that you'd want to make sure really in the first coded field, you'd be selecting to exclude. Following the output all the way through, you'd see that show up in your excluded list in your pivot table. So it would be something that you decide in that very first financial data tab, and then you'd see it in the excluded list in the first pivot table report.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess you could include it. Most states will make a choice about excluding some costs like facilities or construction, and we anticipate that will be a common exclusion, but it could be included and then just parsed per pupil like everything else, or assigned specifically to schools. Is that correct, Renee?
Yep, that's right.
So yeah, so you could exclude it, or you could include it and parse it, or include it and leave it as a separate line item somehow.
And what I will say is this tool is also intended to be iteratively used. So you might want to go through and see what your first guesses of your coding is, whether you want to include something at school or at central, and then see how that plays out. And then if you realize you want to actually take those dollars that you said would be accounted for at schools and actually account them for at schools, you can go do that in the underlying data and then see how that plays out. So you'll be able to actually make decisions throughout the tool that you could then reapply to your underlying financial data and go through the process again.
And ERS has actually imported real data. I think they've changed the school names, but real data in here from districts in different states. So has pressure tested it in a way to make sure that it works. And then the larger the district, the more data you're going to have. The smaller the district, maybe the more intuitive. People could do this on the side, I guess. I think in some ways you could play around with the data set, and you may say, I get what we're doing here, and actually go back to your original file and work on that. But the tool walks you through a nice set of steps to get there. All right. Any other questions or comments along the way? All right, well, we will get you all connected with the ERS team. And there's one more slide here that Katie wants to touch base with you on. I'll hand it back over.
Yeah, just want to highlight again, we don't have a group call again until June 8th, so it's about 3 weeks away. But we do have time for TA calls. We've had about 4 calls in the last 2 weeks with SEAs, and they've been really informative for us, and I think useful for the states as well. So if your state or district is interested, please either comment in the question box, or just send me an email, and we will set up a time in the next 3 weeks.
And also, we've had some newer members join, or if you feel like you've missed some meetings along the way, the May 31st BSCP Center webinar will kind of take you across a lot of the territory that we've covered, sort of all at once in a little bit more narrower and organized way. But that's May 31st at 1 o'clock Eastern. And so if you feel like you joined along the way, or you missed some webinars, or you just want a refresher, or you want to send somebody else from your team to get caught up, that's a great catch-up webinar. So so we hopefully will get some of you come over that one. That will also have some of the regional centers there, some of the folks from the Department of Ed, and then some other people on that webinar. So it's a larger audience, but you're all welcome to attend. And otherwise, reach out to us, and thanks for everybody for coming.
Thanks.